Welcome to day 3 of our short history of Chinese ceramics broadcast from our gallery. We've had the 2 previous ones, were the Han and the Tang Dynasty, and today we're going to talk about the Ming Dynasty. Such an important era in Chinese art history and Chinese ceramics in particular. It was a period of growth and expansion. Lasted nearly 300 years and covered 17 emperors. And it was stable, there was wealth, and wealth signified there was building works going on as well. Many things were built and expanded.
The Ming Dynasty runs from 1563 until 1644. And if we put it in perspective with the European history, we're in the Middle Ages. And here, of course, in our city of Hertogenbosch, it's the time of Hieronymus Bosch, the famous painter. We were talking about, in the Ming Dynasty, that so much was built. Of course, the Chinese wall was extended, improved, enhanced. Immediately...
Yes, that was for protecting against the marauding Mongols who wanted to obviously conquer China back, which they'd taken from the Mongols.
Yeah. Also, during the Ming Dynasty, we see the capital moving from Nanjing to the city of Beijing, as it is today.
And this was also because it was a more northerly location, and it was so therefore they had more idea of what was going on in the north and to protect their northern borders.
The capital, Beijing, of course, immediately brings us to the Forbidden City. It was during Emperor Yongle in 1406 when they started to build the Forbidden City. And the Forbidden City you can still visit today. So this comes very close to our world and the idea we have of China nowadays.
So the Forbidden City was made as a palace for the Son of Heaven, as the emperor was known. And it protected people from coming in, but also him leaving or being so easily accessible. So it was a very private little world in which they lived with the courtiers and with the concubines and the servants. And very much the way it is, if any of you have been there ever, it's pretty much as it was when the Ming emperors built and expanded it.
During the Ming Dynasty, we still see in pottery production, glazed pottery, we see stoneware, and we see the continuation and development of Chinese porcelain. Especially later in the Ming Dynasty, we see an explosion in the production of Chinese porcelain.
And the production center was a city called Jingdezhen in southeast China. And why was that the production center? Well, it was already a smaller scale production center, but all the basic materials were there for making the porcelain. So that you had the porcelain stone, you had the clay, and from there they could produce all these wonderful porcelains. And due to the increase of affluence, that meant that there were more orders for this porcelain. So there was much more coming in. So even by the middle of the Ming period, the court was ordering 100,000 pieces of Chinese blue and white porcelain in one go.
We also see during the later Ming Dynasty, the first contact with Europe via sea. And this has all to do with the Portuguese who were sailing to China in the early 16th century and came to spread religion, but they were also clever and businessmen like us Dutch, that they saw porcelain, they bought it, and they transported it to Europe.
Let's go and see, because This is exactly the piece we're going to talk about. It would have been something the Portuguese would have brought with them.
Yes. This is the object of the day. It is a Chinese porcelain blue and white crack porcelain dish. And maybe you can explain the name crack, where the name crack comes from.
The crack is a name these big dishes and bowls are referred to due to their style, but also because the first load that came, crack is a Dutch word for caraca, and the caraca was a Portuguese trading ship and a warship as well. And when the Dutch, there was a bit of war with the Portuguese, and they sunk a karak. And on board of it, they sunk some, but they also took one back to Amsterdam. It was filled with blue and white porcelain like this. And since then, it was called kraak, named after karak, karaka.
Typical of Kraak porcelain is the very coarse way the dish is made. It is warped, it has a very rough edge where bubbles of air have exploded during the firing. It has a classical design. In the center, you see this rock with ducks. We have on the rim lotus petal-shaped panels with pomegranates, fans, and in between these rolls of silk. If I turn it around, you can actually see the same design, but stylized on the back. And what I love of this plate is that this part is unglazed. It's the biscuit of the porcelain. And you can still see the turning of the wheel of the potter who made this dish. Also, a typical feature is sand fired in the glaze of this dish, because the pieces were still put in a kiln in sand. Later on, they developed the so-called Sager system, where you have these crates of terracotta where they put individual pieces inside, because the process was still quite simple. It was the kiln was like a build-up tunnel, very long, elongated, and the pieces were put in sand all the way. It was called the fire dragon. It was fired with wood. There was no thermometer. There was no switch saying 1400 degrees. Simple process, creating such a beautiful product.
But despite, so this product is big, the kraak dish is big, and this period they were producing this and bowls, fairly simple shapes, so they could mass produce them fairly easily. The contrast, the other thing they were producing was more refined, smaller and delicate porcelain made for the imperial family, such as this bowl. And this bowl, you see, is a much smaller size. Hold it up one more second, Frost. So you can see the difference in size. So you have the small bowl with the big dish. And the refined wares for the imperial family, they were smaller, more delicately painted, and all the imperfect pieces were destroyed because they couldn't be sold on. So you know that if it's got the imperial mark on the bottom, and this is 1 li, this is exactly the same date as the kraak dish, but there you see the 2 streams of porcelain being produced, the smaller, finer pieces for the internal imperial market, and the larger kraakware type pieces being produced for export.
If we go earlier into the Ming Dynasty, we were talking about glazed pottery, and here you see a typical classic object from earlier Ming Dynasty, glazed pottery, mythical animal. This is tilework. It's glazed earthenware. It's the sort of object you would see on the roofs of the Forbidden City. And this particular object...
And roof tiles.
And roof tiles. This particular object is a stand for a pole of a canopy. And here you see this vase on the back of the animal. The pole would rest in this opening. If you had, for instance, an important Buddha figure, you have this little tent, the canopy, with poles standing in this elegant object.
And so the tilework products were, as opposed to Jingdezhen we were talking about, the tilework was produced near to the area where it would have been used. So either a constructing temple or a pagoda, as we find in Nanjing, the very famous Ming pagoda in Nanjing, or perhaps tombs. And it was very durable because it was glazed, but it was fairly simple to make and fired at a much lower temperature. So they would just, here we're building, they'd build a kiln, produce the stuff, and then the whole workforce would move on to the next building site when needed. So slightly more mass-produced tilework. You have the kraakware, which was the export, and then you have the slightly more refined imperial wares, which were being produced at the same time.
Are there any questions on the chat?
Yes, we've got one question from Mirta, and she asks how the blue color is made from the little bowl you just...
Yes, we didn't mention. So the Ming period actually does know a few colours. Red, which was made with copper, but that was fairly unstable. And the blue is made with cobalt. And cobalt was a product, a stone which was ground down and then painted on the dried body and fired after glazing, and it would produce this colour. And obviously, the finer and the better quality cobalt there was, the more deeply bluey, purpley the colour would be. And obviously, this is the blue that we know for the typical Chinese blue and white porcelain, the classic.
Yes. Are there any more questions via the live chat?
No, not at the moment.
Then I think we've come towards the end of our number 3 live stream.
There's so much more to tell. I'm sure we've skipped or omitted lots of information, but you can find this film and other information on our website.
Yes, we would like to thank all the people who are watching live now, and we hope to see you tomorrow, day 4, object number 4, and we will talk about the Kangxi period.
The iconic Kangxi period.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.